This season on Navigating Abroad, we're back at the World AI Festival in Cannes, talking to some of the brightest leaders in artificial intelligence. We'll be delving into the important questions around the impact of AI on our world, what the ethical implications are, and how we can ensure these technologies are used for good. Karen Silverman is the CEO and founder of the Cantellus Group, and she is a total boss when it comes to advising Fortune 50 companies, startups, and the public sector on how to manage cutting-edge technologies. With over 20 years of experience at Latham Watkins, she's a leading global expert in practical governance strategies for AI and other frontier technologies. Welcome, Karen. It's such a pleasure to see you here in Cannes for the World AI Cannes Festival. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, it is my pleasure to be here. It's quite a backdrop you arranged. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we all lucked out on this one. So Karen, I would love to hear more about your firm and what took you this direction of figuring out all the legalities of these new world of transformation we're all living through.
Yeah. So it's been a journey and a great one. I feel like we're still at the beginning, which is wonderful. But I'm a lawyer by training, spent several decades in and out of corporate law and government and so forth, in a practice that sort of involved a lot of technology and technology companies. And what I quickly understood was that with the advent of artificial intelligence and blockchain applications and CRISPR and all of these really frontiery technologies that were going to change the way we do things, there was a whole need for understanding how we were going to govern them and how we were going to really integrate them into our organizational systems as well as into our lives. And so I set about creating a consulting company, which is the Cantellus Group, and this is what we do, is we help organizations think about what they believe in, do principles, of course, but really figure out how to get those principles into practice that works. So, and that's been a big gap, I think, in the approach, and so we're trying to fill that gap in the approach, and we work with amazing companies to do it.
The first challenge is, what do we even govern? And then it's, what do we think the guidelines need to be? And then you realize you're going to have to iterate it many, many times over. And then how do you measure implementation of that? There's so many steps for where we are today versus where businesses need to be. So it's wonderful that you're focusing in on the actual where the rubber meets the road and where impact actually happens.
You got it. That's what we do.
Can you share with us a success story of one of your clients about how they were able to bring that concept of shared value and actually make good business choices by being ethical and thinking through long-term consequences?
Sure. And I think we take a lot of this for granted in other areas. So for instance, when we talk about food companies are very alert to the fact that they don't, reputationally as well as from a regulatory perspective, don't want to make their customers sick, right?
Yes.
And I think in technology, we've been a little bit slow to figure out that there are these knock-on effects and unintended consequences that over time compound and can alienate customers, right? And so some of what we do, and we meet customers wherever they are, and they're all in different places, which I love, right? Because some are technology forward and have really evolved ideas of what they want to do and where they want to go and what their challenges are. Some are more legacy type businesses that all of a sudden realize they're implementing or want to implement these sorts of technologies and need to make adjustments for them, right? And it's not an enterprise software system that is hard to implement anyway, but these technologies really do have a different quality and character in some respects.
And a different risk profile.
Absolutely.
Risk of missing out, and then also risk of implementation without the right policies and boundaries in place.
There's so many analogies running around and so much confusion. And I will say also that the language around this area is also muddled, right? So we use the same terms to mean different things, different terms to mean the same thing. Getting consensus around how we're going to talk about this and what we're going to mean when we say fairness and what we're going to mean when we say transparency in this context. Is really important, and it's always more than one thing, and there's always more than one context. So just getting everybody comfortable with that, and then getting everybody comfortable with the idea that this is ongoing work. This is not a project, one and done, we've got our binder, we're good. This is really a learning to interact with the technologies on the consumption side, but also learning how to think on the development side, sort of, and the design side about what these technologies are good at and what they're not.
Yeah.
And that will also change. So the whole ground is moving, and we have to move with it. So a great success story is, was a client for whom we put in essentially a maturity model and roadmap that has a lot of adjustable, and we usually start with, I know at the conference everybody's talking about pilots. Pilots are important. We don't know how to do this, so
Absolutely.
We have to find out. And the best way to find out, because these technologies scale so fast, is really with pilots. So take the learnings and you can impose those in other domains. But clients who have taken the time to step back, not done all the things at once, because that's not realistic,
Nope.
but who have come up with sort of a map and a way, to your point, to measure their success against what they need to accomplish from their own just sort of corporate metrics, and also what they want to accomplish over time, if that makes sense, right?
So that
they
crawl,
can see,
walk, run.
Right,
Yeah.
and with that evolution, take the learnings and then adjust the map, right? So we came up with a mechanism, and that was a success partly because I think it advanced the work, but it was a success also because it gave them a way to explain to their board, to their insurance companies, to their regulators, what they were doing, right?
Yes.
And I think so much of this work gets done internally, or it's in somebody's head, really, a lot of the time, but even within an organization, but without a mind to the understanding that they're going to have to explain it to somebody, like our customers, right? So we come in and we help them, impose order on chaos,
Yeah.
and give them language for it. So that's a success.
Giving them a tangible framework that they can socialize to gain alignment with all of their stakeholders.
And they can do training, they can do, and you measure success, and some of the success is measured in how you adjust and elevate your roadmap.
Absolutely.
Right? Because you've learned something and now it's like, no, we know this. And
You're speaking to my entrepreneurial experience. I did 20 years in corporate, and then I ran my own business before coming into consulting, and I'm so grateful I had both experiences.
Totally different, right? Yeah.
It was a good street MBA, I'll tell you that. But to realize how many decisions businesses have to make on a daily basis in order to meet all the masters of the needs of the investors,
Right.
the needs of the regulators, the needs of the employees. I have a lot of empathy for business leaders right now going through this transformation.
Yeah, I think it has to start with empathy, because it's never going to be perfect.
No.
Right? And these tools don't make them perfect. And there's not a lot of understanding.
Yeah, and I think we have so much precedence in the legal field for this is the law, this is how we don't violate it, this is how we do violate it, and it's very crisp and clear, and it's set until the next precedent is set.
Nope.
There is no ideal model yet, and every industry is going to have different risk tolerances. Every industry is going to have different regulation bodies that they need to align with, and getting that many non-technical people to understand the nuances of what you can and can't do within the framework, I think is probably one of the greater challenges we'll have over the next 5 to 10 years.
It intersects with cybersecurity, it intersects with data protection, it intersects with privacy, and national security very often. And so you've got this whole suite of issues that are currently being managed and processed and understood and frankly reported up in silos within
Discreetly, right?
Discreetly, when in fact there's a lot of resonance between them. And so helping particularly leadership, helping them sort of understand the landscape of the whole digital domain is important, I think. And because then you can start to set rational priorities, which will change because events change. You get ChatGPT and then you get chat wars, and then you're like, oh, okay. But so you're managing AI, and that's hard. Now you're managing a digital suite of issues, and that's hard. And you're doing it in a global context where suddenly, even if you're not a petroleum company, national security is a very important piece, and like the world is just complicated, right?
Yes.
So you've got these 3 levels of complexity that are, and still, to your point, the need to make decisions. And
And give a financial return to your investors.
Move forward. We were talking about the empathy. I think that's a really important place to start. And even when I talk to the most sophisticated, highly trained, technologists, who have all the degrees from all the universities, they typically know one area really, really well.
Yep.
But they're completely unsteady in some of these other areas. Like they might be quick on the uptake because they have an instinct for it, but very few people have all the skill sets on board, right?
Yep.
You know, personally. And so helping organizations bring those skill sets together in new ways, like very often what they have, or what they need, they have. They just have it buried in parts of the organization that aren't talking to each other, or at even levels that aren't talking to each other. So trying to discover, not that you have to hire 15 more data scientists to do 20 more things with 3 new databases you've never worked with. It's that happens.
In the data lake.
In the data lake. Oh my God. That happens. But also just unlocking what they have.
Yeah, discovery and surfacing what they're doing right.
What they're doing right, and how they can just get more out of existing resources, and it's wonderful work.
I imagine.
But it really starts from this position of understanding the challenge, and then the other challenge is board directors, who
tend to not be at the beginning of their career, tend to have some experience and a perceived way of doing
things. And we
things.
still want that, but how do we bring everybody along and up to speed and get them on a common base of knowledge so that they can, will do the oversight that they are obligated to do, but also be partners, to management when they need to be partners to management. And so there's just a lot of unevenness in this space, and we're trying to, in our own little way, smooth out some of those areas so that people can just do better with this more confidently, fundamentally.
Absolutely, and that's half the game. It's going to be an endurance game, because you're not going to stick the landing first, and you're going to have to continue to evolve and innovate. So how do you bring everyone along on that transition?
Right.
So with that theme in mind,
and saddle up for that event, because that's the event. Yeah.
So with that, for business leaders that are newer to this technology framework, what are some of your recommendations for getting more familiar with it in an accessible way, for regulators, for the boards, for the C-suite that maybe have a ton of business acumen, but the technology is not something they've specialized in?
Right. So I always say it's funny, and the focus on generative AI and all these general purpose sort of the GPT type technologies kind of really brings us to the surface, because now we've all been touched by AI, but we've been consuming it on our phones.
Yeah, it was kind of invisible to us, right? It just kind of
unless you were looking
showed
for
up.
it. Yeah. And now we're developing the very first of these technologies where we're really going to be co-creating with technology. Completely different exercise, right? So one of the things I would say is we need more of 3 things. We need much more curiosity, being kind with yourself and others as you just ask questions. So making room for yourself and your board and your C-suite and your teams to ask questions, because we all have them. And I think part of where organizations go a little bit wrong is where everybody assumes that somebody else has figured it out, and so then you start getting this weird anxiety.
And I think I sat with the data science community for a full calendar year before I understood anything of what they were talking about.
Right.
And I have an industrial engineering and operations engineering background. So I'm like, but what I realized, it was like you had to be a statistician and an engineer and a psychologist and a product manager. Like nobody are these unicorns. Everybody has a strength that they play to in this community. And when I realized that, it was so freeing. To just be comfortable being uncomfortable, because everyone is, and we're all faking it
to some extent. But I think people know more than they think they know, and if they ask questions, they would figure that out.
Yes.
Right? So I think curiosity is one thing. I think humility is another. That we. It's not just that we don't know what we don't know, it's that things are going to change and things are going to happen that are unexpected, and people are going to do things that we don't expect. And we need to meet that with some, and we can't expect the technologies to solve all the problems, right? So we have to have some humility about the technologies we develop, and some humility about how we apply them, and that we might get some things wrong. And that's okay.
And how people take what we've applied and then apply it to a new domain, and
Right.
are there unintended consequences?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then the third thing is discretion, right? Which is that just because we can doesn't mean we should. And having that minute to kind of consider where are we on that spectrum. And on the technology side, I think the thing to understand is that, first of all, AI doesn't have ethics or rules, really, except for the ones we give it, right? It's a completely a reflection of whatever
Data was curated
and the design of the system and the
what it's
labeling on the
optimizing
data,
for.
and I mean, at every level. I talk a lot about the difference between model outputs, which is what your model produces, and outcomes, which is what we produce, right? And,
Yes.
Right, and sometimes the difference between an output and an outcome is going to be very close and tight, but sometimes that difference is going to be very big, and we're going to just use these models as support tools. They're going to surface information that'll make us smarter so that we can make the decisions we need to make. And most of these tools still today, and they're generating predictions, right? Often very good predictions, but just predictions. And they're basing their probabilities and predictions on historical, either factual or hypothetical combinations of data. And so when humans do that, we recognize that there's an error factor built in, there's an uncertainty factor built in. And when these technologies do that, we got to assume the same thing.
Yep.
And so just from a technical perspective, just not confusing what these technologies are producing and the tools they think they're getting.
In the area of digital safety that I specialize in, there is never going to be a tool that will distinctly tell you if something is a terms of service violation or not, once you get past swear words maybe. That's
Right.
very black and white. So much of understanding and classifying whether something is a violation or not is really a human activity, because you have to look at context, you have to look at data, you have to look at the harm it's causing. There's so many factors that come in that just machines can tell you, the last time we saw something like this, it was a problem, so you might want to look at this closer, but it's probably not going to be making the call.
Like when you go to the bank and want to get money out, you don't want it to wonder.
Yep.
You want your transaction done, right? So we're demanding kind of instantaneous performance, which we will get, but we need to therefore understand that sometimes those instantaneous,
The trade-offs.
right, that if we're asking for instant answers, we're going to get the quality that an instant answer brings with it, if that makes sense.
It totally does. And I should clarify that the domain expertise that I focus in on requires, because these will ultimately in many cases go to criminal litigation, requires a human in the loop.
Yes.
For that reason.
Right. So you're already dealing in an environment where humans are very integrated into the systems.
Right.
And on network optimization, for instance, if you're just running a telecommunications network, it's making decisions all the time. I think these tools are really good in two situations, broadly speaking. One, where we're very, very sure the future should look like the past. Like we just want this thing done over and over and over again, 24/7, the same way. And they're really good on massive data sets that are so massive or on time frames that are so short that a human just can't process it.
Yep.
And in that instance, they really do add either insight or productivity in a way that is new and novel.
Yeah.
And they kind of unlock latent
They find
knowledge.
the wisdom out of an ocean of information.
They find the suggestion of wisdom, right?
Yes.
And that's just it. And in those instances, we really need to apply some
Subject matter expertise.
right.
It's an input out of maybe 4 or 5
And there
inputs.
just may be a bigger gap. So it's still very useful in that context, but it's often not the answer. It's the hint or the start of an answer.
I could talk
if
about
that
a
makes sense.
pilot we did in the healthcare industry where for trauma victims of catastrophic car accidents and things of that nature, there are certain people with a few different factors that will require a blood transfusion, but they only have 8 minutes to get it or they will bleed out on the table. Well, the surgeon wouldn't know all the background factors. And so it was a great example of how you can run a model in the background to know if you need to go get things working at the blood bank to bring it into the trauma center. And that takes the responsibility off of the surgeon who's actually trying to just fix the traumatic event. And the nursing team and the medical team can take care of that piece.
That's a great example because it genuinely improves the level of service that the patient gets and the experience of the
Yeah, there are
medical
people
team.
that will be alive that would not have been otherwise, but it doesn't take away from.
And even if it doesn't work 100% all of the time, it's improving the outcomes for those patients. Yeah, so that's a really great use case and example. And part of where we get in trouble is where we're trying to use these tools to do something that's not in one of those two categories.
Generalize something that's better for specific instances.
Yeah.
So I think we all learn more from our failures than our successes. Can you share an example of something in this domain that you had to learn the hard way to help prevent maybe others from going through that same experience?
So two things. One is that there are a lot more people who are ready to support you and morally support you, but not actually support you. And in this space, I've been very gratified because people are genuinely interested in the area and
passionate about the problem space.
Passionate about it
committed.
and who are good at traditional things and really didn't want to change. So just understanding that this was a new way of doing something and not expecting the past to look like the future or the future to look like the past, which is ironic. Yeah.
We're all going to have to be lifelong learners. The concept that you get one discipline and you stay in that for your whole career is antiquated.
And like I said, there's nothing wrong with the other approach. It's just not going to fit this problem. And then I think early in my career, the mistake I made was not listening completely to my clients, and not because, and I learned how to listen to clients and I learned how to figure out what the real problem is.
Yeah.
Which is not
what they say they need and what they actually need. Sometimes there's a distance between.
Yeah, and there's just a discovery, and it's usually a joint discovery of what's really behind that challenge, right? And so I think doing that wrong enough times and getting weird outcomes, it was a skill that I finally learned and acquired, and I think that's a really critical skill as we move into this new space where the real problem comes from so many different directions and can't be about only one thing. And I think if I had not hit several walls early on that particular front, I would not be able to do what I'm doing now.
Same. For people that want to connect with you and take advantage of some of your services, can you share a little bit about what the best ways to find you are?
Sure. Actually, it's cantellusgroup.com. Karen Silverman, you can find me. I'm online, and I think the best way to reach out is either through LinkedIn or the website has an intake sort of request form.
Well, thank you so much for spending your time and helping us all navigate the future a little bit less bumpy.
Thank you for having me, and
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much.